So the way we talk about our favorite movies is pretty weird. I've said for years that Eraserhead was my favorite film of all time, every time you ask. And while I mean, how true can that be, really? I like different movies for different reasons throughout my life. Like, how do we really pin down our favorite movies? Is it the one that we watch the most? Because I've seen Phantom of the Paradise like way more times.
20th Century Fox presents Phantom of the Paradise, a gothic horror story.
What was that?
Is it based on influence? Because so many films have influenced me in my life. I think Ken Russell's The Devils is probably the film that most influenced me.
And so the king and his ministers discovered resistance in Loudun, in the quite remarkable Urbain Grandier, a man to be described variously as martyr and lover, politician and priest, and finally, sorcerer, an agent of the devil.
So, I think when it comes down to it, the concept of choosing one specific favorite film is kind of totally arbitrary. But for the purpose of discussion today, Eraserhead is my favorite film. And if you don't know who I am, oh shit, who am I? I'm Nyx, hello. How are you?
What's wrong with you?
Careful, Remington, I'll put you back in the hole.
Oh god, not that.
There is no Nyx.
Ah, what the hell is this now?
I have no idea what's happening.
There is no Nyx.
Yes, there is, unfortunately.
What is this strange and totally unrecognizable voice?
There is no Nyx.
This is preposterous, strange sky voice. You think I'm just gonna let some dingus voice come in and just take over the show? Jeez, every time I go to shoot a video, some mythical stupid thing comes in, takes over, and derails the whole thing. Anyways, so today we're gonna talk about Eraserhead, and why I love it so much that I just keep making damn videos about it. I've talked about Eraserhead for so long now that all of its subtleties and minor weirdness just make total sense to me. I have a really hard time empathizing with someone who is still experiencing the shock of seeing it for the first time, yet at the same time I experience the same emotional reaction every time I watch it. It still gets me. Actually, I would claim it's one of the very few movies that gets me in new ways every time I see it, and this seems to be a pretty common thread amongst people who share my love for the film. For example, I had a sound design professor at film school tell me that after he had a child of his own, the screaming baby in Eraserhead unnerves him in a way that he always has to get up and leave the theater for a few minutes when he shows it in a class. And for those of you out there that have seen Eraserhead, you totally get it. It's an unnerving thing, this movie. But for those of you out there that have no idea what I'm talking about, allow me to introduce you to this little enigma of a movie that is still just as challenging, funny, tragic, weird, and horrifying as it was the day it premiered. Allow me to walk you through Eraserhead. Woo! Wow! Whoosh! So what the hell happens in Eraserhead, you might be asking yourself? Well, turns out that's a much harder question to answer than you might think.
I assume you're gonna tell us?
Yes, you goofball! Eraserhead is the story of Henry, a young guy with a silly haircut who works in a post-war industrial wasteland future. Well, he did work. Now he's on vacation from his job at Lapel's factory, so now he just sort of wanders around. The opening of the film shows us quite possibly the most unnerving and disgusting sex scene of all time, by which Henry vomits up a large worm, which falls into a puddle of water. This all is of course orchestrated by the man in the planet, who pulls these levers which are presumably controlling Henry's fate. Are you still with me?
No, you dingus.
Henry's seen later walking around and doing, well, not a whole lot. Upon returning to his apartment and standing in the elevator for far too long, his neighbor lady tells him that a girl named Mary called. It's implied that Henry and Mary had a relationship of some kind when Henry puts a ripped up photo of her back together. Henry goes to visit her and he's invited to have dinner with her family.
You never come around anymore.
Her mother is a strange woman that seems to be hiding some kind of secret and is most definitely judging Henry.
It's Henry, isn't it?
Yes.
And Mary's father is this weird goofball guy who worked his whole life and kind of wrecked his body, but at least he's optimistic.
I'm Henry.
Henry's at Lapel's factory.
Well, printing's your business, huh? Plumbing's mine.
30 years. I've seen this neighborhood change from pastures to the hellhole it is now. I'd put every damn pipe in this neighborhood.
Dad.
Now, people think pipes grow in their home. Well, they sure as hell don't. Look at my knees. Look at my knees.
Naturally, anyone who's ever had dinner with somebody's family for the first time knows how, like, really awkward that can be. And this film illustrates this in the most bizarre way possible.
Oh, good.
The dinner conversation gets even stranger when these little chickens come out and Henry has to carve them because...
I had an operation on my arm here. Doctors said I wouldn't be able to use it. Well, what the hell do they know, I said. And I rubbed it for a half hour every day. And then I got so I could move it a little. And I got so I could turn a faucet. And pretty soon I had my arm back again. Now I can't feel a damn thing in it. All numb.
But then, like, stuff comes out of them, and it's horrible. So Mary cries. Then Mary and her mother run off and...
Well, Henry, what do you know?
Oh. I don't know much of anything.
Mary's mother pulls Henry aside and asks him the most awkward question in the universe.
Did you and Mary have sexual intercourse?
And then we learn there's a baby, and in the most miserable moment, maybe in the entire movie, Mary asks Henry if they can get married.
You don't mind, do you, Henry? I mean about getting married?
Jeez.
Yes, but it gets much stranger. Hold on to your butt. Mary moves in with Henry and they take care of the baby, which, well, it's not normal. It's a cow-looking thing. There's a lot of speculation as to how the effects in this film were done, but there isn't one true answer. It's commonly believed to be like a mixture between like puppeteering and stop motion.
It's unsettling is what it is.
The baby is horrifying and annoying and cries at night and it's scary and yeah, it's just a nightmare. Mary and Henry's life has become a nightmare. I mean, even the tagline for the movie is a nightmare of dark and troubling things. So, you get it now. Henry starts to hallucinate that there's a woman in the radiator with huge cheeks that innocently steps around a stage stomping on worms that fall from the sky.
The hell is that about?
Just be patient. So Mary leaves Henry because she just can't take it anymore, and then he's left to take care of the baby himself, and thus ends a lot of the plotting of the movie. From here on, it's Henry ending up in bizarre and strange sequences, sexual images that are as strange as they are horrifying. Henry sees the lady in the radiator again, who sings a song about how in heaven everything is fine. Then at the end of the film, Henry's sexuality is challenged by the presence of a child, by which naturally scares the hell out of anyone that sees it, so he brutally kills it by accident. The man in the planet has to reverse the levers, burning himself horribly, and Henry transports to a white space where the lady in the radiator holds him tight, and credits. And there you have it, Eraserhead, it's over. There you go.
But, what?
Yeah, that's everyone's reaction the first time. It's really fun to show this movie to somebody for the first time, just to kind of watch them react to it.
But...
Don't worry, I'll feed you, baby bird. Let's talk about what this film's about.
What the hell?
For those of you at home, you might want to put on your analysis hat that I sent you.
I didn't get a hat.
You're already wearing the hat.
Oh.
Anyways, first, a little context. How exciting. Eraserhead is a product of David Lynch and his small crew of friends and other talented artists. A lot of us have the tendency to talk about a film's director as the sole creative vision of a film, you know, the author or the auteur. But it's important to remember that film is a wholly collaborative effort. David Lynch is the big creative vision by which Eraserhead came about, but he worked hand in hand with some of the most immensely talented people that made the film come to life. David Lynch worked closely with cinematographer Fred Elms, who went on to be one of the most influential cinematographers of the 1980s and onward. Jack Fisk, the production designer on Eraserhead, worked on Brian De Palma's Carrie, as well as my other favorite film, Phantom of the Paradise. Is he my favorite production designer? He sure could be. He also worked on Paul Thomas Anderson's There Will Be Blood, so there you have it. The iconic sound design for the film was produced in collaboration with Alan Splett, who played a huge role in changing the landscape of how we design environmental sound for film in modern times. David Lynch frequently collaborates with the same creative people throughout his entire filmography. Collaboration is a huge aspect to how David Lynch works, and what makes his film feature such intense artistic choices. It's interesting considering when a lot of people talk about David Lynch, they see him as some kind of pretentious auteur filmmaker that does whatever he wants without purpose and just runs around screaming.
There seems to be a growing trend in Hollywood now where there's a lot of prominent product placement. It's a partnership between the companies and the film. The companies will put their product prominently in the film, and the film will receive budget support as a result of advertising. How do you, as a filmmaker, feel about this growing trend?
Bullshit. That's how I feel. Total fucking bullshit.
This could not be any further from the truth. I would actually claim that as far as an artist who surrounds himself with people that really make him consider every single choice he makes in his films, David Lynch is a powerhouse of meaningful choices. But when it comes down to it, David Lynch is a funny guy. I mean, he openly uses his own persona to ridicule himself and his position within the film industry. He has such a sense of humor about himself that it's kind of infectious. One of my favorite stories he's ever told is in regards to how he got started in film.
And I was sitting looking at this painting, and from the painting I heard a wind, and then I saw the green start to move, and I said, oh, a moving painting.
Yeah, he's a goofball, and I love him. The conceit of his early work was just to animate his paintings, to make them even more aesthetically unreal and to play around with the concepts of time, which the art of painting really hadn't explored up to this point. But upon getting involved in making film with shorts like Six Men Getting Sick, The Grandmother, and The Amputee, he was able to migrate to Los Angeles and study film at the AFI Mansion. His thesis film for graduation was originally set to be a surreal work about a man growing vegetation out of his back titled Garden Back, but upon rejection he presented the idea for Eraserhead. It was also rejected outright until one of the deans of the AFI threatened to resign if his film was not allowed to be made. The script was roughly 20 plus pages, which would kind of translate to about a minute a page. So we're talking like a 20-something minute movie here. The film was cast in 1971 and completed in 1977. The film took 6 years to complete, and after a multitude of changes and limitations in that time, the film grew to a full feature length. Jack Nance, who plays the film's lead, Henry, kept his hair in that ridiculous condition for the entire 6 years of the shoot. That's dedication right there. And now that that's out of the way and we've had some real digestion time on like what happens in the movie, we can get out the analysis hats. You should all have them by now.
What makes this hat so special?
Everyone at home, check under your desk right now.
Hello?
Great, you found them.
No, no one has the hats.
Let's start the analysis portion of the video.
When he was here, I asked him about what was Lynchian. And I took that right out of your piece.
And I'm sure he just looked at you and blinked very slowly.
Well, he didn't have a great answer, because I don't think he thinks that way. He obviously doesn't think that way.
There was, I mean, yeah, there's a part in the essay that kind of does this academic, let's unpack the idea of Lynchian, and what Lynchian means is something about the unbelievably grotesque existing in a kind of union with the unbelievably banal, and then it gives a series of scenarios about what is and isn't Lynchian.
During the production of Lost Highway, writer and journalist David Foster Wallace was allowed on the set to make observations and kind of talk about David Lynch's work. He published an article called David Lynch Keeps His Head, wherein he kind of outlines what happened on set and why certain decisions were made. In the article, David Foster Wallace lines out and defines what is a Lynchian. An academic definition of Lynchian might be that the term refers to a particular kind of irony where the very macabre and the very mundane combine in such a way as to reveal the former's perpetual containment within the latter. So in essence, the point of David Lynch's aesthetic is to bring out the dark undercurrent or the absurdity of something totally mundane. This is to show how darkness and absurdity lives within things we consider to be good-natured. Oddly enough, I have like the perfect example of David Lynch's body of work and kind of how that fits into the lexicon of what's been written about it.
Oh?
So there's this segmented part in Wild at Heart about Laura Dern's character's cousin. That's convoluted. Jingle Dale.
Jingle Dale.
My cousin Dale was always fighting bad ideas. See, Dale loved Christmas. We used to call him Jingle Dale. He wanted Christmas to last all year long. He sure would scream out when his mama told him it was summertime and Christmas was 6 months off.
I mean, this is pretty simple and goes without explanation, but basically Dale is our obsession with Christmas and commercialism dialed up to an exaggerated level in order to show us how absurd it is.
Got so he'd stay up all night making sandwiches.
Dale, what are you doing?
I'm making my lunch!
This is what David Foster Wallace means when he says something is Lynchian. It's really easy to get caught up in all the like aesthetic creativity in David Lynch's work and kind of miss the forest for the trees. The point is, David Lynch has an easily defined, practical aesthetic in his work, and now we can get into Eraserhead.
Oh, finally. Some answers.
The first couple bits of information you need to know are that David Lynch spent some time as a new father in Philadelphia. He had a child, it had a disability, and none of this was planned. The story of Eraserhead is likely a very personal one where he can clearly relate to Henry's character. Applying what we know about what makes something Lynchian, suddenly just about everything in Eraserhead clicks into place. The story is about a character who is on vacation from work, but instead of doing anything fun, there's nothing to do. If you've ever been on a vacation, you know like just how tedious that sort of thing can be.
I've never left this room.
This is obviously taking that idea into like a bit of exaggeration and absurdity, which is, well, it's basically like how everything in the movie works. He meets his girlfriend's parents for the first time, and it's nightmarishly weird in a way more absurd than reality, but in a way that feels the same as the experience actually kind of does. He has a child, which is considered one of the happiest things that can happen to a person, but it's the most deformed, screeching thing ever to exist, ever.
Oh, you are sick.
Even the film's clear symbol for peace carries the foreboding necessity to die.
In heaven, everything is fine.
Come on, everybody, jump on the death train. Sexuality is handled in a way that is both total guilt, disgust, a major risk, and something to be ashamed of. This serves to motivate the inner workings of Henry, a man so repressed from these ideas of shame and disgust that he totally loses his grip on reality. But you know, that's a really weird thing that I just said right there. Reality.
What reality?
It's hard to look at this movie and see anything that remotely resembles reality, but this kind of gets into the formalism of the movie. Even something kind of abstract like Eraserhead clearly establishes normal. And in order to talk about like Eraserhead's normal, we should probably get into semiotics and the usage of sound. And first, we're gonna tackle semiotics and production design. Heck yeah! So what the hell are these semiotics, and wherefore can I purchase one, you may be asking? Well, let me tell you. Semiotics is simply the study of signs and symbols and how they carry meaning. Basically, you look at something as a meaningful symbol and can break down what it means and what implications that has for the message for the story, or pretty much anything. Pretty easy stuff, yes? Alright, well now that we're on the same page, let's move on. So I mentioned earlier that Jack Fisk might be like my favorite production designer. And you know, what does that actually mean? So production designers are responsible for the general look and feel of the space of a film. It's not enough to fill the space with stuff, you have to develop mise-en-scène.
What the hell is that?
So glad you asked. Mise-en-scène is the concept of designing an environment for a scene wherein meaning is conveyed through visual aspects. Color theory, contrast and affinity, semiotics of what objects and props are in the scene, and the implication those things will have on narrative and character. So good mise-en-scène conveys visual information about the narrative of the film, and everything you put in the frame has the potential to have meaning. Applying this concept to Eraserhead, there are two immediate elements of production design that you can be aware of and how those things apply to the narrative. We're going to finally get into some semiotics now. The first is this framed image of a mushroom cloud in the background. We don't quite know what happened to the world of Eraserhead, but images like this kind of clue us into the thematics of the world of the film. This is likely a post-nuclear world, and this is portrayed with the simple addition of this framed image. As the film is more or less a nightmare of a nightmarish world, including this implies that Henry has this concept in his mind, he fears it, or the concept deeply affects him in some way. The second element of mise-en-scène is this dead potted plant without the pot. It's just a pile of dirt with a plant sticking out of it. This is more an element of characterization, really. The plant implies that Henry does not know how to nurture things. The very basic things of making a plant grow and be healthy are missing here. No proper home to grow, no sunlight or water. The necessities of life are missing here. One reaction could be that the tree is a shorthand version that posits that Henry cannot take care of something as seemingly insignificant as a plant, so how could he possibly take care of a child? But it could also represent how the world no longer supports life. The tree is a constant reminder from the very early moments of the movie that the environment in which Henry lives and his character in and of itself are not conducive to nurturing life. Things won't grow here. This is good mise-en-scène because it clues us in as viewers to the theme and meaning of the narrative. The dead plant even reappears later on in a dream sequence where it's gigantic and it rolls itself across a stage, and on that stage it starts to bleed all over the place. Henry's head falls off and lands in the blood, which turns into a sort of portal that his head then falls through.
What the hell is going on?
Let's take a look back at all that semiotics that we developed. You know, exercise that old gray matter, get that cranium going. You still have a brain in there, right?
I don't know.
So the plant being huge and in the forefront promotes the idea that Henry's inability to nurture takes priority. It is no longer in the background, it takes over him. Henry's inability to accept this makes his head pop off, and of course the tree bleeds as a symbol for this taking over and causing damage to his actual child. That thing that was there all along shows itself to be a painful negative trait that inevitably will lead to more pain. And instead of accepting this and trying to find a way to change, he loses his head. Then naturally the scene ensues where a kid takes it to some mysterious business who makes erasers out of it. Eraserhead. Yeah, okay.
Oh.
And of course the implication with this is that rather than make a meaningful change and realize that his inactivity and inability to nurture is killing his child, he erases it. He forgets it. Inside this mostly harmless man is the harmful nature of inactivity. This element of pointing out the absurdity and macabre in the mundane can be visually displayed through the usage of worms throughout the movie. The world of the film literally sees male potency as a disgusting worm. And when we clearly see this symbol present in the film, the lady in the radiator smashing them suddenly becomes clearly meaningful. She is destroying his potency as to not make the same thing happen again. And a deformed baby is portrayed as more animalistic than human. It has base level desires, and the only real psychology it's given is through the psychological lens of Henry's perspective. When you take it at that level, we can clearly see what Henry thinks of that baby without him ever actually saying anything. And in tandem with that, we as an audience are scared of that baby as well. And there you get to this point where we can clearly understand that Henry is terrified of fatherhood, and that's what the movie is about at its core.
Huh.
And that's mostly conveyed through visualization and sound. But the movie never forgets about you, the audience. It's important that it conveys these themes to you. The film, as absurd as it is an extreme form of seeing the world through someone else's perspective. When you realize this element, you can engage the film as a perspective rather than a strict narrative. When we accept the language by which the film is working with us, we can better engage with it. And now that we're kind of speaking on how the film works on us, I think it's time to get into environmental sound.
Great.
So in my Texas Chainsaw 4 video, I got into a strange word, diegesis. As a reminder for those of you who didn't watch that video because you had something much better to do. Diegesis refers to whether something is or is not inside the world of the film. So if something is diegetic, it is inside the story's world. And if something is non-diegetic, then it is outside or interacting with the story's world. So let's pretend for a moment that my house is the narrative. can't go outside, can they? Oh shit. Oh my god. I've made such a mistake. Dan Olson at Folding Ideas made a great video about the subject, and I'll link it in the description. Now, this may seem like an overly complicated way of explaining something so simple, but it's important when we talk about the sound design in Eraserhead and what makes it so genius and innovative. Here's the concept. It's called room tone. This is essentially the environmental sound of a space. Every space is kind of the same, but every space is a bit different. Thing is, when we watch movies, we hardly ever hear silence. We may think we do, but we don't. We hear environmental sound. The sound of the space that is so well integrated that we often don't even notice it's there. Even something that we would consider avant-garde still utilizes many of the same techniques. Eraserhead uses room tone as well. The difference is how the room tone is used. The environmental sound of the movie is that of this like post-industrial world. We hear a lot of different micro sounds coming from outside. Factory sounds, machines, pipes, and wind. This paints us the character of the world, and on top of that, this change in how we use room tone also serves the diegesis of the film. This sound, which we would consider an abstract, exists in the world of Eraserhead. I think the best illustration of what I'm talking about is the scene with the elevator. So then what doesn't exist in the world of Eraserhead? This is where we get into how the film establishes normal and how it juxtaposes normal with abnormal. What is actually happening in the film versus what is figuratively happening. I mean, obviously this part where a hot spring hole appears in the middle of Henry's bed is not actually happening. This sort of thing is clear, but the drama of the scene is real. When the lady looks over at the baby in horror, we know what is actually happening. There is clarity in the drama of how the scene works, but we can all agree this is not within the normal of the film. The truth of how film blends its reality and fantasy exists in how it uses its environmental sound to create a hidden abstraction. Things get more intense and the room tone gets louder, but the implication is that this sound exists within the world. At the beginning of the scene, we would all agree the sound is diegetic, but at the crescendo, the sound is very clearly non-diegetic. There's no clear moment where the environmental sound becomes non-diegetic. It kind of evolves into a fantasy over time. The film as a whole behaves this way as well. We start off and the normal of the film is clearly established through its obtuse form of room tone, and as the film progresses, we leave the diegesis behind until the end where everything that we would consider conformed with the film's normal is gone and has been replaced by fantastical non-diegetic noise. This may seem both overcomplicated and like something we've kind of seen by now, but in 1977 this was kind of unheard of and new and exciting. And this always stood out to me as like some grand highlighting moment to how I kind of think about sound in my own work. I mean, I want to talk about the lady in the radiator singing scene, the in heaven scene. It's quite possibly the most crucial scene in the entire film. It is the linchpin. See what I did there? We start on black with an environmental sound. The lady in the radiator approaches as we move in as a complete surprise. She comes from black into spotlight and begins singing. The sound in the opening of the scene draws a lot of attention to itself, but it is believable as the film's normal usage of environmental sound. When she comes out singing, this breaks the film's normal, but also doesn't. Her singing here is diegetic. She is actually singing within the context of the film. However, the accompanying music we hear is non-diegetic. This scene is not really happening in the sequence of events. We're seeing this scene from Henry's fantasy perspective. This so clearly blends the line between fantasy and reality that we don't know what is actually real, but we do know that Henry is viewing it this way, and to top it off, she's singing about death. Henry is clearly seeing his own reality as a fantasy by this point, insofar as what we would consider an extreme decision appears normal. He is escaping reality by fantasizing about death. And almost all of this is conveyed through sound and image. But most of us really don't know how to talk about it. I mean, it's affecting us clearly, but like, it feels impossible to define. Of course, all this jargon-based discussion here may seem a bit foreign for the viewer, so that's why I think talking about ambiguity is really important when talking about Eraserhead or any of David Lynch's films. As simple as I can put it, David Lynch is considerate of the effect his films will have on an audience. These concept-oriented diegetic decisions are means to serve the specific function of making you feel what Henry feels, that the line between fantasy and reality is blurred. Something about the lady in the radiator seems scary and strange and wrong, yet at the same time she is obviously meant to appear inviting. Those big cheeks are a gross exaggeration of a welcoming sense of beauty and happiness. Do you see what I mean when I say all this? Like, these decisions are extremely clear, but they are also ambiguous. They are complete ideas. They are presented in a way that forces us to engage with it rather than expecting us to pull whatever we want from it. I see this kind of thing like around an awful lot. Like, we want this thing to be open for interpretation, but there really isn't anything there to interpret. You don't really get this "oh, of course" moment with the symbolism used. It's art that's not particularly bold or clear. It's impossible to engage with. And this just kind of gets to the point that ambiguity without real intent feels incomplete. It's a difference between your movie being a confusing mess and a mesmerizing emotional powerhouse. Eraserhead is a tragic, sad, funny, and nightmarish story, as well as being a film that you don't fully understand. The emotionality and the humanity of the film is clear. This is why so many people kept going to midnight screenings of the movie. They wanted to engage with it and, to an extent, get lost in it. They wanted that weird, funny, tragic, emotional experience that no film up to this point captured in this sort of way.
Interesting.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense now, huh? Huh. How about that?
I mean, no, but...
There is no Nix. At least not anymore. Haha, check it out, guys. It's me. I had a sense there was going to be a major explanation of something complex that still might go over some heads in the audience tonight. So I took some arcane liberties to make an appearance and remedy the matter. But because I understand how disturbing this might be, I decided to go with more of a cute way of doing it instead of the usual thing you might expect from an H.P. Lovecraft story.
Wah! That makes it worse.
Yeah, probably, but I'm having fun, so that's all that matters. While you've all just heard a majorly enlightening talk about audio diegesis and the power of sound from Nick's Spheres, I'm thinking that a good amount of you might be left wondering exactly what the visuals in Eraserhead mean. This is the old familiar battleground that Nick Spheres and I have shared before when discussing David Lynch. Semiotics, or the use of symbols and visuals in film to convey abstract ideas. In the world of film and visual storytelling at large, there is a method of conveyance we have all become accustomed to. The presentation of moments or relatable experiences that can be found in real life that get across an idea or emotion. These are very simple, very literal displays of widely universal ideas and common actions. Scenes of romantic encounters, confrontations with enemies, hesitations and preparations before dangerous maneuvers. We establish empathy with characters for the experience they have by watching them in very literal, very straightforward moments in life. We understand what we see, and from what we know of what we're seeing, we feel an emotion. The scene's action is creating emotion that is passed over to us. We get the emotion because we understand the scene. That is the normal format. Scenes are built to present actions we understand, and actions we understand generate emotions. What we've just learned from Nick Spheres is that David Lynch does not operate on the same level as other filmmakers. He is not content to do things in the usual manner of artistic language, and his use of diegesis and sound is a clue to how he works in a visual manner. Most movies incorporate music and sound to provoke emotion in the audience, or bring it out more in a scene that you're viewing. It's an act of drawing you into the movie, strengthening your suspension of disbelief. Lynch uses it to establish the territory of his film's reality and a character's fantasy, letting you know when something is fake. It's their emotion that you're meant to be seeing through, not your own that's being provoked. In comparison to the way that most films work, you might say that he's doing things backwards. Lynch's visual storytelling in Eraserhead works precisely the same way. Backwards. Remember how we just underlined the way that scenes are built to convey emotion? Well, in Eraserhead, emotion is what builds the scene. Usually, when you hear or see a word, you mentally receive the word itself, and not even a nanosecond later, you get its meaning. First form, then context. You get the envelope, and then the letter inside of it. David Lynch turned this idea inside out for Eraserhead and used it as a storytelling method for the rest of his career. Eraserhead is the artistic construct of thoughts and feelings experienced or discovered by David Lynch during the time of his first child's birth. Fear, disgust, a sense of being trapped, living a nightmare, dealing with feelings you wish you could crush or throw against the wall. This is what Eraserhead is made of. The only difference between this movie and a film about a young artist who accidentally impregnates a woman and hates his life is the author. You can find any screenwriter or director to make this movie today, and they'd be able to provide the full context of Eraserhead in a way that every audience member can understand, because they would take what David is trying to say and write fully relatable scenes of literal, ordinary actions that convey the emotions, rather than letting emotions write the scenes as abstract art. But because it's David Lynch, feelings take the wheel and present themselves in the same way that an abstract artist presents their feelings. A twisted, raw collage of objects and actions that speak in ways words can't quite convey. When I first saw Eraserhead, I had precisely the same reaction that Nick Spheres mentioned most people have. David Lynch is some kind of pretentious auteur filmmaker that does whatever he wants without purpose. I left Eraserhead feeling like my time was entirely wasted by an overly artsy student filmmaker who should have been reined in by experienced professionals. My opinion of David Lynch was very low, and I couldn't imagine what people saw in him. Everything about my opinion changed when I saw Mulholland Drive, a movie so powerful, so creative, so captivating, that it's one of the only movies I consider to be a perfect film. How is it possible that I made such a turnaround? Because David Lynch's artistic path works the same way as his movies. Backwards. Mulholland Drive is Lynch at his most easy to understand, even when he's being abstract. It's his 9th feature film, so he's had time to dial down the need to mainline emotion for his work instead of engaging audience empathy. Most filmmakers start out plain and then get more and more experimental or daring as they go along. David Lynch came into the building riding a bulldozer waving a rocket launcher, and then, film by film, he toned it down until hitting a balance of abstract art and realism that everybody could access and enjoy. Once you begin to understand Lynch through some of his later pieces, you open up to his methods, and Eraserhead becomes just another puzzle box instead of a pretentious art installation. You learn to speak the language of Lynch, which is one that's entirely unique to him and seems to be full of now well understood concepts it seems that he introduced to the world of film. Imagine that you are 21 years old. You are a young artist, full of hope and ideas, excited about the world and its possibilities. Your future is laid out ahead of you, bright as can be, an entire world for the taking. You have dreams, you have plans, you have freedom. Your adulthood has really just begun. And then there comes an accidental pregnancy between you and your partner. The year is 1968. The chances of not having this baby are as low as your feelings about suddenly sacrificing your entire future for a child you did not intend to have. You and your significant other get married. Remember, it's 1968, a year in which babies out of wedlock are more shocking and condemned than young marriages. You move to a house in a crime-infested part of the city because it's all that you can afford. You pick up a mundane job to support your new family dynamic. Again, a family dynamic you never expected to have, now robbing you of every freedom you dreamed about just a month before. By the time the child is born, you are only 22 years old. This is the situation that David Lynch was in when his daughter Jennifer was born. He and his first wife Peggy were married in 1967, and we have a quote from her about the situation. Lynch definitely was a reluctant father, but a very loving one. Hey, I was pregnant when we got married. We were both reluctant. The story of Eraserhead is the story of David Lynch and his fears of fatherhood from 1967 through 1968. Everything you see is Lynch's emotion crafted into scenes. His feelings, his thoughts, all made into abstract art conveying his emotions in ways that words just couldn't. Meeting the family of a girl you've broken off with and being put off and disturbed. Seeing nightmare visions of birth and the trauma of a mother-in-law's anguish. Coming face to face with a hideous, needy creature robbing you of everything you want in life. Trying to deal with a still healthy sexual appetite you now have to shove in a box and ignore, and sharing a bed with someone you can't even say you married out of love are just some of the set pieces making a full nightmare vision for a creative young man of only 21. We never will know how autobiographical Eraserhead is for David Lynch, but we know how he was inspired to create it and what emotions and possibilities for human experience he discovered through his ordeal. Wanting to undo your living mistake or just commit suicide to escape from the prison you've built around yourself are dark feelings, and perhaps telling people what went through your mind using abstract art is the only way that you can gain true catharsis without being attacked. What I'm referring to here are specific components of the film that confuse people to a major degree, which I'll now be happy to explain directly.
Thank God!
The scene of Henry's apparent death in a fantasy world probably drives people as nuts as the woman in the radiator. I know the first time I saw it, I didn't understand what was going on. But once you put down your gut reactions and any prejudice you might feel about this being an overly artsy student film, you can see that things are much clearer than they appear to be just by following the events in order. Henry appears on stage. His head is blown off by the baby he suddenly has, which replaces him. This kills Henry while the baby occupies his body, his identity. Henry's head falls to earth where it cracks open and is picked up by a young boy on the street. The boy brings it to a few men who proceed to use it on a machine loaded with pencils that have no erasers. Henry's head was the secret component they needed to create erasers. Upon taking a now complete pencil out of the machine, one of the men draws a line, erases it, and declares that it's okay. A pencil mark, previously permanent, has now been made erasable by the inside of Henry's brain. His deepest desire at this time is to erase that which can't be undone. There are very few mistakes in life you can undo without causing any damage. A baby is not one of them. But erasing his mistake is all that Henry can think about, with so many feelings about its existence effectively killing his identity and eliminating his future. Henry the Bachelor is dead. Henry the single father of a newborn baby in the 1970s is all that remains. This fear chases him out of the dying dream, presenting itself when the woman that Henry has sexual fantasies about across the hall looks at him and sees only that ugly newborn. Even if the man that she's currently hooking up with is uglier than Henry, being a young single father instantly makes him the most repulsive partner option. Then, after failing to kill his newborn out of a desperate need to gain his free bachelor status back, Henry is attacked by a monstrous version of it. He's only made his problem worse. He finds himself with a woman from the radiator who appears in white and talks about how in heaven, everything is fine. This woman was seen earlier crushing worms on stage that resembled a small ring-like worm that Henry keeps in a box during the movie. Had David Lynch not instructed this woman to have grotesque makeup effects for her cheeks, I might have understood who she was meant to be much earlier than it took me to solve. But having discussed the film with Nick Spheres, who has studied Eraserhead to a deeper degree than I ever could, this woman's role in her connected piece, the worms, have come to light. At first, I was absolutely baffled by the woman in the radiator. What was the deal with her appearance? I knew she was some kind of hopeful piece, a sort of savior, but I couldn't place exactly what. The worm-crushing scene really put in place the sense that she was meant to be helpful, and by the end, I had accepted the idea that Nix was presenting to me during my second viewing. This woman was death, and the worms, which I had already noticed looked like sperm cells, were Henry's sexual desire. Not in love with the woman that he married, but still being young and lustful, Henry wanted to go out and be free, especially with the woman across the hall. But he was trapped now and had to conceal this part of him that was still alive and had already gotten him in trouble. Death, it seemed, was the only way to eliminate desire for good. Death was also the only way to get out of the hell he had created for himself with that hideous inhuman baby he couldn't take care of and didn't want to. The mistake that he wished he could erase. What I had taken from my first impressions of Eraserhead without speaking to Nick Spheres was that the woman was some kind of angelic force. After all, she spoke a lot about heaven, and in a way, she is an angel of death. Her appearance is awful in only one way. Without those horrible puffed up cheeks made of prosthetics that could easily be ripped off, there'd be nothing wrong with her. She's just fine. And still, with them, you notice she is attractive, but those gross cheeks ruin her. Why would David Lynch make that choice? In my opinion, it's because death is attractive and hideous at the same time for Henry. It's the ultimate way out, but it's still suicide. He would still be dying. The woman is pretty and ugly, salvation and destruction. And on the topic of supernatural or highly powerful spiritual forces, there is something else in the movie at play on that level, but you'll have to do the puzzle cracking for that on your own. By now, we've given you the tools you need to walk through Eraserhead and not only make sense of the general story and idea of the film, but some of its more abstract and crazy pieces. I've occupied somebody else's stage long enough. Thanks for letting me drop by, everyone. Good night.
Holy shit, I feel like I just died. Like, for real. Fuck?
Someone took over your body while you were gone, but luckily they talked about Eraserhead, so we didn't get too off topic.
Well, I think that's good.
So, what do we do now?
I don't know, I guess we should end the video now. So in short, yeah, Eraserhead, I guess it's my favorite movie. While David Lynch has gone on to more or less perfect his particular approach to cinema, I love his first attempt in a way that seems unending. I always go back to this one film. And this may be unrelated, but the new season of Twin Peaks is on TV and streaming right now, and well, it honestly brings things out in me that I had totally forgotten cinema could make me feel. It's like a giant wave of inspiration that a lot of viewers share right now. And one of the best things about it is how it captures the thing that I feel when I watch Eraserhead, that total fascination with story and character, taken to absurd lengths while also backing it up with truly legendary form. Thanks for watching, kiddos! I hope you dug this. You know, I've made videos about this movie before, but I never felt I ever got close to doing something that said everything I thought about it. I guess this is as close as we're gonna get. If you like what I do, consider dropping me $1 on Patreon, like these folks did. I'd like to thank the people who helped me make this video possible. Tyson, Carmelita Jalapa, Gabriel Bishop, Travis Morris, Topher, John Redford, Ryan Creasy, Kyle Backhus, Zach Taylor, Rain, Sarah Kelm, Jack Edgar, Ruby, Drew Benson, Kira Dude 5, James Id, Reckless Conventions, Caitlin Rep, Oliver Bulmer, Paul Holiday, and Abysme. The Dark Lord blesses you.